Hello, welcome to a new series. So I have been looking forward to this for some time. I've probably been mulling over this series for the past year, when I knew eventually I would catch up with myself with the Set Musings episode. So I'm calling this Deck Musings, and I suppose the impetus for this came from this article. So this article is now on MTG Wiki. Originally I stumbled across it purely by accident on Wikipedia. It's not there anymore. It's been moved over to MTG Wiki. And it's this rather useful standard timeline article. And what I like about it is that it goes through and it breaks down the Magic timeline against standard. And the table has sort of beginning, the ending, the legal sets, total cards, comments, and notable deck archetypes. So, and you can see you go through here and it has, what sets were in standard at a given time, how many cards were in that pool of cards, if you like, and then some notes, and then you have the main archetypes. So what I wanted to do, as I was planning where to start this from, is this point. So when they had the new deck construction rules, so to me this is the point where they really nailed down standard, where you have standard decks can be composed of cards from the most recent edition of Magic the Gathering, and what they're talking about there is the core set, and all sets from the two most recent blocks of expansions going back. So from the point at which they set that in motion, here we are, July 1997, which has Icelands, Homelands, Alliances, 5th edition. So this is what was at the time the Ice Age block. Here's 5th edition. Here's Mirage block. So I thought this would be a really good point to start. Now, before I dive in, there is one thing I'm going to mention. This is not a series about the history of archetypes. There are much better resources out there, particularly YouTube channels that specialise in archetypes through the ages. The purpose of this series, if you like, is to muse over a particular deck at a particular time, to look at the artwork and to look at the aesthetics of the mechanics and to see how that might have changed over time, whether or not we see those sort of cards anymore. Now that will give us some clues as to maybe why a particular archetype disappeared, if those particular cards just aren't available anymore, or the archetype turned into something else. But what I will do is I will point to certain resources that I have access to where they do specifically mention these decks. So today's episode I'm going to be looking at Green Stompy from 1997. As I go through these different decks in Magic's history, I may choose to spend quite a bit of time in a certain era, and I imagine I'm going to be spending quite a bit of episodes sitting around here going through some of the different archetypes, looking at the sort of cards and seeing were those cards reprinted later on, and what are cards similar to them, and what cycles might certain cards be part of. As we go forward and we move into this era, so really we're getting into Tempest, I'm going to start also looking maybe at theme decks in parallel, but not spending a lot of time on them. So if I find that for a particular archetype there was a theme deck that was released that was very similar, I will show that theme deck on screen just in passing. So that's where the theme decks come in, but we can't really do that, at least in paper, until here, until the point at which, until the point at which we start to see Tempest coming in, because theme decks weren't a thing until Tempest, at least in paper. There are some Mirage Visions and Weatherlight theme decks out there on Magic the Gathering Online, but that was only a retrospective thing to time with their release on MTGO back in the day, which occurred, way after Mirage Visions and Weatherlight was originally released. But as I said, I will momentarily point to some archetype resources. I'm not going to highlight specific YouTube videos, because really you can just go onto YouTube and search, and then that way you get the most recent channels that are doing the most recent analysis of archetypes over the years. Here's the archetype very briefly described on MTG Wiki. I'm going to be looking at Senor Stompy, particularly the deck from 1997, and we'll come on to that deck in a moment. I will tend to focus on decks from Worlds or major tournaments as well. And I'm going to highlight a couple of resources, one of which you should still be able to access. So way back when this came out, I bought this Next Level Deck Building book by Patrick Chapin. I think it was actually written in maybe 2013. I'm not sure if it's been updated since then, but there's a really nice history of archetypes section, of which, as we can see, Senor Stompy is in here. In a number of different places, it crops up in the explanation of mana bases, but also the archetype explanation that goes in this book about the way the deck works. And the idea is generally for this to be a really fast deck. So in here it falls after some archetypes where that's the case. So White Weenie, and various other token decks, or as they call them, swarm decks. So when we come to look at the deck, you won't be surprised to see a lot of low mana creatures. The idea is to get them out fast, get them in fast, and win quickly. And if you don't do that, you'll see that there's might be certain problems in the deck. So it wasn't the most interactive of decks. Also, this is a harder book to track down. So this Next Level Deck Building is still available, I believe, on the Star City Games website. I think it's about $37. This one, however, is harder to track down. This is a really interesting book, a Deck Deconstruction Companion by Beth Morrison. I've mentioned it multiple times. I think I've even had it on camera for a Seeds of Flourishing video, and it's in here as well. So with this book, it looks back to the original Deck Deconstruction series, which they ran in the Duelist, and then the articles are updated. So you can see some of these came out in 96 through to 98, and then they update them for the publication date. So for instance, the Senor Stompy section, they look at other mono green decks that sort of replaced it because certain cards disappeared out of standard. Oh yeah, there's the Star City Games one. So as far as I know, it is still available. So digital download. I don't know if there are physical copies available or not. I'm unsure. It's such a long time ago since I bought it. But yeah, very interesting for the historical thing. So onto the deck. So here we have the deck as it is. If you are able to track down the 97 Worlds deck. So they did print this in paper back in the day. You can see this is where the gold bordered. This is why it's gold bordered. You can see the signature of the person that played the deck at Worlds here, and it also name checks where it is. Let's have a look here. So yeah, the Sven Gertsen Senor Stompy deck, 4th World Champions 1997 in Standard. So here is that deck. It's available in paper. Again, I'm not sure how much it costs. So what I did was I took the deck and I recreated it in, if you like, time relevant versions of the card. So this is what it would look like if you built it from cards exactly at that time. Now, admittedly, a lot of these are available in different versions, and some people aesthetically would prefer to have giant growth in a black bordered version. But I just thought it'd be interesting to talk through with the cards with them, like the most recent printing at the time at which the deck was put together. And that's what I'm going to be doing going forward when I walk through these. I'll show you if there's a physical version of the deck that you can just buy, like a pre-con, and then I'll show you what it may have looked like with the most recent sets. And of course, if you have a bit of a thing about white border and black border alongside, well, yeah, it's just something you're obviously going to have to deal with. So what do we notice just in overview before we start to look through the individual cards? So you can see, well, the first thing that's probably the most obvious is that there's a lot of creatures in the deck. We've got 32 creatures. And the mana curve, if we sort this by mana, is pretty low. So you can see lots of 1s, lots of 2s, and some higher end creatures. But this sort of nice curve. And if I scroll down, yeah, there's the curve basically. We've got a sideboard over here as well. Obviously the idea is that's going to deal with particular decks at that time. So the deck itself, there's 4 Winter Orbs, 4 Giant Growths, 2 Bounty of the Hunts, 16 Forests, 2 Hearts of Yavimayas, 4 Fyndhorn Elves, 4 Ghazbán Ogres, 4 Quirion Rangers, 4 Rogue Elephants. So you can see there's a lot of stuff like 1-drops. 2-drops, we got Harvest Wurm, Spectral Bears, Whirling Dervish. 3-drops, Jolrael's Centaur, Uktabi Orangutan, and a 4-drop in the form of Lhurgoyf. So what I'm going to do now is put it into a slightly different view so we can, appreciate this from a slightly different angle. Let's try this in grid view so you can see what's going on here. So with Winter Orb, players cannot untap more than 1 land during their untap phases. Here's our creatures. So we have a Mana Dork, 1 to cast, it's a 1/1, and you can tap it to add green to your mana pool. Notice the wording at the time on here. Ghazbán Ogre, it's a 1-drop, it's a 2/2, but it has this downside where during your upkeep, if a player has more life than any other, he or she gains control of Ghazbán Ogre. So the idea being that you just get the damage in real quick, so you always have like a higher life count than your opponent. And my understanding with the deck is if that happens where you end up giving your Ghazbán Ogre to your opponent because they have a higher life count than you, then it's probably inevitable that the deck was going to lose anyway. At least that's my understanding of it. So really, it's just speeding up that loss by you giving away your 2/2. But of course this could bounce around. So yeah, so it's because it checks during the upkeep. If a player has more life than any other, he or she gains control of Ghazbán. So again, if for some reason your life gain is higher than your opponent's, then you get your Ghazbán Ogre back. Quirion Ranger, 1 for a 1/1. Return a forest you control to owner's hand, and tap target creature uses ability only once each turn. Rogue Elephant, 1 for a 3/3, but when it comes into play you have to sacrifice a forest or bury it. Move on to the 2-drops. Harvest Wurm comes into play, return any basic land card from your graveyard to your hand or bury. So you can see, in order to have these creatures which are, you're getting a more powerful creature than you would expect for the curve, particularly at that time in Magic. There's these downsides where you're bouncing land, or you're having to bounce land back from your graveyard. So this is interesting. So it's turning any basic land from your graveyard to your hand, but you can see how these two interact. So this one, you're sacking a forest, and then this one, that forest is now in the graveyard, and you're then leveraging it. So they're actually working together here. There's synergies in that. We've got Spectral Bears. So Spectral Bears is declared as an attacker, and defending player controls no black cards. It does not untap during your next untap phase. So again, there's a downside for a 3/3 for 2 under certain circumstances. Whirling Dervish has protection from blacks. It's a double green for a 1/1. If it damages any opponent, put a 1/1 counter on it at end of turn. Jolrael Centaur has flanking, so whenever a creature without flanking is assigned to block this creature, the blocking creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. So it's a 2/2 for 3, but through flanking, the blocking creature gets -1/-1. And it also cannot be the target of spells or effects. Uktabi Orangutan, 2 and a green, when it comes into play, destroys a target artifact, so 2/2 for 3 with an additional ability. And then Lhurgoyf, so it's a 4-drop star, 1+star. So, and this is a common thing you see with this sort of category, or this type of creature, where, and these have dotted throughout Magic's history, where their power and toughness are equal to some mathematical calculation. In this case, it's the number of creature cards in all graveyards, and toughness equal to 1 plus the number of creature cards in all graveyards. And there's variants of that with Lhurgoyfs. Instant wise, we got giant growth, so +3/+3 buff for 1 instant speed. This one, and we'll be looking at this in a bit more detail in a moment, Bounty of the Hunt, 3 and 2 green. You may remove a green card in your hand from the game instead of playing Bounty of the Hunt's casting cost. Put 3 1/1 counters distributed any way you choose on a number of target creatures. Remove these counters at end of turn. Interesting way of doing things. That looks familiar, doesn't it? And we'll come on to why in a moment. There's our forest. And there's our Heart of Yavimaya. So the Heart of Yavimaya comes into play. Sacrifice a forest or bury Heart of Yavimaya. Tap, add green to mana pool. Tap, add target creature. Sorry, target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So again, notice how this synergizes with this. Also notice here all the white bordered cards will be 5th edition. And we've got cards from Ice Age, Visions, Weatherlight, Homelands, I think that is. Is that right? Yep, Homelands. 5th edition again. This would be Mirage, Visions, 5th edition, Alliances, 5th edition again. I just chose to use lands from 5th and another one from Alliances. Here's our sideboard. So in addition to the cards we've seen already, Whirling Dervish, Uktabi Orangutan and Bounty of the Hunt, we've got Crumble, it's a bury target artifact. That artifact's controller gains an amount of life equal to its total casting cost. Emerald Charm, and so both of these are 1-drops. Choose one, tap target permanent, or destroy target global enchantment, or target creature lose flying until end of turn. So you can see here how these additional cards, which you don't see in the deck, you probably get some idea what particular archetypes these might be good against once you've worked out what what decks you're playing up against and in the second game. River Boa, 1 on the green with Island Walk, also regenerates, a 2/1. Whirling Dervish we've already seen. City of Solitude, 2 on the green, each player may play spells and abilities only during his or her turn. So you've noticed as well there's a little bit of a lock going on here, or a control element in this deck. So we've got a Winter Orb in here, where players cannot untap more than 1 land during their untap phases. So with a fast deck, with low casting costs, this card works to your advantage. So what I want to do now is just go through the cards and start to look a bit broader at how many times they've been reprinted. So this actually did crop up in Master Edition, but online. Since the original World Championship deck, you can see this is the original one from Alliances. It's been in the Deckmasters Precon, but also the Cold Snap theme deck as well, one of the theme decks. So I mentioned that this looked very similar to something. So if we go into the Scryfall Tagger, this is where things get very useful. So you can see here with the Scryfall Tagger, it's a useful way of finding cards that are similar. For instance, you have something here that indicates what it's similar to. So Seeds of Strength. So that's a green and white card here from, this would be Ravnica block. But also this group of cards. So if we actually bring this up and use the command, I think it is first printing, you can see that from Alliances this was part of a cycle. So we've got Bounty of the Hunt, Contagion, Force of Will, Pyrokinesis and Stars of the Veteran. And you can see all of these, you have a choice to pay the cost another way. So the green one, the black one, the blue one, the red one and the white one. And that was all in Alliances. And then obviously we can go through and look at other cards that this is, similar to in some way. So I find that a really useful feature. Now this is part of the so-called OTAG feature, or the Scryfall Tagger. You can see if I pick another one of these, where are we? And then blend it out. You can see how that works. Now these are all these are all tags that have been added by contributors. So Fyndhorn Elves, you can see reprinted quite a number of times. So already you can sort of see how this card here, you know, if it's not been reprinted in a set after alliances, how obviously if you've opted to go with Stompy as of 97, you know, you were building the deck around that time, you're going to have find something else that does a similar thing. And if we were to look this up independently, we might get the feeling that, you know, it is something that you maybe didn't see that much straight away after that set. But you can see there's other cards later on in Magic's history, and we also saw that green white one, which do. And my understanding, my take on this is one of the problems with the green Stompy deck at the time is a lot of cards that were critical to its performance rotated out of standard. You can see there's a number of cards from alliances here, and there was nothing as strong that could replace it or replace them. So the archetype morphed, or what was the main green archetype, mono green archetype at that time, you know, changed. And if you follow through, you can sort of see what other green archetypes might have, risen up in the ranking as a result of these cards disappearing out of standard. And in the deck, I'm just in the book, one of the books I'm just looking through here, they have things like, you know, where is it? I mention here. Yeah, it says green has long been the ugly duckling of Magic family. Players complain that green doesn't do anything well. Of course, remember this was written at the time. And after this, I believe there was something they called the stupid green deck. I believe there was a Stompy deck that did turn up in 98 Worlds, but didn't do so well. And then at that point, you had the stupid deck come about. So with Fyndhorn Elves, let's open the Scryfall Tagger again. You can see, obviously, there are cards that we're probably familiar with that are very similar to this. Also, we get some cards that do a similar thing, but for a slightly higher cost. But these two, obviously, functionally, yeah, it's the same. Now, if we look at what is it referred to as mana dorks, and then we ask it to only show mana dorks with a CMC of 1. So there's 21 cards across all colours where that's the case. If we further refine it down to just green cards, you can see they are all the green mana dorks. We get a few interesting ones like Jorga Tree Speaker, where you don't get the ability to generate mana until you start to put level counters on there. So for 1 it's just a 1/1, and then you have to level it up. But you can see a few other variations on a theme here. So in the case of you know, a green mana dork in standard throughout its Magic history, probably not such a big problem. You know, they're always seemingly kicking around in some form or another. This is really interesting. So, you know, a single green for 2/2 with this interesting downside. You can see again, didn't really see it after this point. It started off in Arabian Nights, was reprinted in Chronicles. This Masters Edition, if you're curious, was how they got cards onto Magic the Gathering Online retrospectively. So let's have a look at the Scryfall Tagger. And again, interesting to see what cards it's similar to. So we've got Wild Dogs. So this is a 2/1 for green. During upkeep, if a player has more life than any other, that player gains control of Wild Dogs. But it also has cycling on it as well. And other interesting tags like Defector here. There's the Ogress. And this is obviously one of the unsets. And then we've got tags like Drawback. So let's look at Defector type cards, because that's interesting to see. So are there many, I would wonder, are there many 1-drop Defector cards? I would muse that. That would be... And this is all about what I tend to do when I look at older decks. It's like, okay, what other cards do similar things in those colours, and when did they first appear? And again, you know, you have that really useful is first printing. To see when they first turned up. And then if we're interested in like Goblin Cadets, well, look, Urza Saga, and then not until 2011. Well, with all of these, and you can see there's some very high casting cost ones here. We could obviously put it in, where are we going to do here? CMC order, so that would be mana value. That's an interesting card, Contested Warzone. So what about cards in green that do that? Again, moving on from the one we just looked at, Ghazbán Ogre, we have our old favourite Giant Growth. So yeah, this, if we were to look through all of the printings, you can see, yeah, sort of Magic the Gathering All-Star. And there's a number of very interesting different pieces of artwork as well, including the original brown mouse version. So this is the one from 5th edition. That's the Ice Age one. Interestingly, I think in the deck, as it was printed as the pre-con, they show this version of the artwork. When did that? So that, yeah, that artwork did first appear in 5th edition, I believe. Yeah. And it's funny how occasionally you get these, you know, sudden changes in artwork that maybe just exist for one set, and obviously a lot of that's tied to the themes of the set, as we've looked in various set musings as well. So let's have a look in here. So a number of So we've got this reference by. The other thing is, so this, first of all, let's look similar to Might of Oaks. So how is it similar? Well, it's higher casting cost, but it's that, instant pump effect. So 3 and a green for a 7/7. We also got Unnatural Predation, which is better than. So it's a single green for a 1/1 and trample effect. And then this related to Seal of Strength. Single green, sacrifice Seal of Strength, target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn. So that's an enchantment. Got our Might of Oaks, Giant Regrowth, Growth Charm, and Might of Old Crosser. Now, of course, again, you're probably going to recognise what this is a cycle of. So let's have a look again at the is first printing. Maybe I need to save this somewhere. I'm really enjoying this. I don't know if the viewers are, but this is definitely bringing a smile to my face. Maybe it's not quite the angle people thought I might take with this. That's that's where I really want to sort of take this at the moment. So there we have the original cycle of boons. There is also an interesting, I don't know if it's got it here, another cycle as well. So let me try and find that, because they slightly altered the power level. Yeah, it's not here. There's a later, so that when you see it in cycles after, let me just go back here. When you see it in cycles after the first time it was printed, so in alpha, beta, and unlimited, I suppose, you'll notice that they take out Ancestral Recall, and I believe, is it Healing Salve? They put a slightly better Healing Salve in, so they take out and replace it with a worse version of Ancestral Recall, and then put in a slightly better version of Healing Salve, something like that. So you could argue a better balanced cycle. And probably if I go in here, I probably can find, well, there's all sorts of instances where it's better than, but yeah, at the moment I just can't remember the particular card. There's Harvest Wurm again, never reprinted. There's Rogue Elephant, which is also in the in this deck, and then a number of these other things you can click through to. So this sort of regrowth land effect as well. Stuff that cares about basic lands, and there's all manner of creatures there. And then so-called virtual vanilla. Now, going back to this, because I think it was interesting, again we can apply the same sort of stuff. So if I ask it to just show me the green stuff here, put it in mana value order, locate it. Also maybe I will do is first printing. There it is. So just cards with a similar, regrowth effect on it. if we were to look at just creatures, maybe that gives us a better idea about where that sort of effect might crop up. Moving on to Heart of Yavimaya. So again, not been reprinted. So alliances. So again, let's have a look at the Skyfall tagger. But this bit's interesting. So although it hasn't been reprinted, you'll probably recognise this sort of, you know, when it comes into play, do something or it gets buried. We do see a lot on lands in various forms. So let's just see what we've got here. Cycle or replacement lands. So if we do this, you can probably spot something here. So if it's easy to see if I do is first printing. There's probably an abbreviation for this. Maybe is FP or something. Let me grab that now. Make this a little bit easier. There we go. There you go. So there's actually a cycle of those in alliances. Oh, that's a nice cycle. I think I have one of these, but in... Do I have one? Not sure. Yeah, maybe, no, not sure about that actually. Yeah, I'll have to check through my... Now, I doubt if I do, it'll definitely crop up on a Friday artwork video. Yeah, I should look through at some point. I can't promise it this week, but because I've got a slightly different pool of cards to draw from planned for this week's Friday artwork video. But yeah, that's I'm already seeing cards which I wouldn't mind digging out of a binder if I happen to have copies of them. And yeah, putting them on camera. These would look really cool up close, I reckon. Now what I'm trying to find here is under the categories, do we see any other land? So we've got a number of lands that sacrifice things. Either as an alternative cost or as a combined cost with an activation cost. But oh, no, that was the one I already did. So we've got some synergy forest stuff. Okay, that's fine. So I'm just trying to work out the quickest way of getting into where I want to get into. So you can see there's a lot of lands that obviously have some sort of sacrifice effect on them. But what I want is let's do this a slightly different way. Well, what I'm thinking of, actually, I won't bother bringing it up because it's going to maybe slow me down, which is the Ravnica bounce lands. So I suppose if I did set equals Rav and then type land. There we go. It comes into play tapped. When it comes into play, return a land you control. So with this one, you return a land. So with this one, you sacrifice a land or you bury it. So with some point is, some lands of this type, you're bouncing stuff back to your hand, but with this one, it's specifically sacrificing it. Okay, Jolrael's Centaur again, just in Mirage. I suppose flanking isn't really a thing nowadays, but flanking is a form of evasion. And so that falls into the category of things like flying, intimidate, those sort of things. You can see evasion is, a big thing in Magic the Gathering. And if we look at particularly how green handles evasion, which is interesting. So how does green handle evasion on a creature? So you've got things like Swamp Walk, and let's do that, and sort it by mana value. So we've got a number of cards here which are obviously flip cards. It's also interesting to see green flyers. So slightly higher casting cost than some of the stuff we're seeing here. But if I was to look at the other CMC3 stuff, we've got things like Cat Warriors, does it through Forest Walk. Killer Bees has an interesting way of doing it by, this pump. And the interesting thing here, there's no limitation on pump. So Killer Bees was Legends 4th edition. But you can see the starting point's a lot lower. And this just comes into effect through flanking, but also it can't be the target of spells or abilities. And that's the other thing, that shroud effect as well on there. Moving on to Lhurgoyf. We open this up. Okay. Similar to Revenant. Revenant's power and toughness are each equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Now, interestingly, this has cropped up a few times. So there's our 5th edition one, World Championship decks. It was reprinted in 8th edition and in the Commander 2011 product, and as a consequence ended up in the anthology because that deck was reprinted. So if we look for this card, what we're going to muse about is the Lhurgoyfs. So here you can, there's 11 Lhurgoyfs. Tarmogoyf, that's probably the one people remember a lot. And if we look at when these ones were printed in their original first printing, and we look at the set number ascending, the release date ascending. There we go. So that was the first Lhurgoyf. And you can see that value on a lot of these cards is calculated slightly differently. But look at the difference here. 2 and 2 green. Lhurgoyf has power equal to the total number of creatures in all graveyards and toughness equal to 1 plus the number of creatures in all graveyards. Tarmogoyf, this is done on card types. So there is going to be like an upper limit on that. But it's just 1 and a green. This one is on land cards. So sorceries. You can see here we've got Mortivore. So 2 and 2 black as opposed to 2 and 2 green. Power and toughness are equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyards. Slightly different calculation here. Got 1 more for the toughness. But yeah, I didn't realise just how few Lhurgoyfs there were through Magic's history. Oh, the Quirion Ranger. Didn't really crop up again until Modern Horizons 2. You can see there's things like, actually this is referenced by, not so much that, but these untap a creatures. So return a forest you control to owner's hand, untap target creature, uses ability only once each turn. You've also got forest synergy cards as well, which is an interesting angle in Magic. Rescue lands. So where you're returning forests, bounce them back to your hand. Of course, this is an interesting ability in combination with certain utility lands that have ETBs on them, but it would have to have the type of a forest, so it's fairly restrictive. And I'm not sure of any way you could leverage that actually. Just trying to think. I'm trying to remember if there's ever been any mono green utility lands which actually specifically mention forest in the land type. Rogue Elephant. Again, like so many of these cards just never reprinted. But they do have that it's, well, similar to Harvest Wurm, which we've already seen. And of course, Scythe Tiker. Single green for a 3/2 with Shroud. When it enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you sacrifice a land. So how many times has that been? Yep, only appeared in Zendikar. Spectral Bears. So when it attacks, if defending player controls no black non-token permanents, it doesn't untap during your next untap step. So pretty specific to the deck, and it is in the main deck, cropped up in anthologies, but that's it really. And again online, as a consequence of it needing to be available, I suppose, for legacy formats. Referenced by Spectral Force. And there's a whole load of drawback cards there. So that one's a rather complicated thing to look up and see if there's something similar. But so you can sort of see why a lot of these disappeared. Uktabi Orangutan, another one. So yeah, so much of this deck never reprinted. The functional reprints, there's not always something that does exactly the same. Now we've got Viridian Shaman, so 2 in a green. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact. It's 2 in a green. And of course we've seen a number of larger creatures where they have this ability to destroy a permanent generally, like stapled onto them. And so that's sometimes nice where you've got like a bigger spell with a bigger creature and this destruction ability. And so, particularly in formats like Commander. Colour shifted, Manic Vandal. That's the 2 in a red one for a 2/2. Destroy target artifact. Yeah, this is the one I had in my head. So Acidic Slime, 3 and 2 green for a 2/2. It has Death Touch, but it will do artifacts, enchantments, or lands. And, I'm always particularly interested actually in, green cards that do this sort of thing. Particularly if it's stapled to a creature. So this one, you definitely see it in different guises throughout Magic's history. And obviously a pretty useful card to have, but the card itself, there it is in 6th edition, so I missed that actually. So Vision 6th edition crops up again in the World Champ decks in 99 and in 98. So that was around, you can see it was reprinted, yeah, like we said, in 6th. So it stuck around for a while. Whirling Dervish was stuck in as a time-shifted time spiral card. We're talking about the 5th edition version here. Originally, you know, in earlier Magic sets, going all the way back. Interesting artwork. So 1/1 for 2, pro black, and this strange thing of putting just 1/1 counters on something. Actually, no, sorry, I misread that. I thought it said until end of turn, so if I've thought that, I do apologise. Serves me right for not reading it properly. But put a 1/1 counter on it at end of turn, so it's adding it. Yeah, so it's not doing any combat damage shenanigans. I'm just trying to think how that would even survive. Oh, it's, yeah, so yeah, if it's damaging an opponent, so if it gets through, starts getting bigger. But it is a 2-drop. It's colour shifted there into black, but had protection from green. Evasion because it's pro-black. And of course there's a number of cards where you get these gaining of counters on them. So let's see how common that is in green. Oh, of course the evolve mechanic, but done on the ETB. Interested a bit in 2-drops that do it. Mana value. That's interesting. So we can see here how, you know, we've got different ways of getting those +1/+1 counters on various cards. Yeah, until end of turn with some of these. Okay, moving on. Winter Orb. So, it's reprinted in Eternal Masters. It's an old card, and let's have a look. So yes, obviously a feature of stasis, also similar to Static Orb. So let's have a look at some stasis stuff. So there's the original stasis, there's smoke, and then we actually have this permanent artifact. So these are enchantments. So definitely here you can see early on in Magic's history a lot of fun police cards, and then a gap. If you do this, and then we ask it to show all prints, let me take that out. There we go. It sort of gives us a better idea of point at which they stopped reprinting. So here we can see copy here, and then we've got Static Orb. I suppose taking out, there's Winter Orb again, but that's online. Yeah, so the online stuff messes it up a bit. So again, of course we want the that one. That'll help. And these stasis cards. So yeah, a bit of a gap there, I think, if I've ordered that right. It looks like there's a jump from what's 7th is Kamigawa, and then we've got Shards block. Oh, that's Shards of Alara. City of Solitude. Again, look, so many of these cards never reprinted. Reference by Tarifi. And so, of course, preventing things from casting is a thing. Again, I'm curious as to how much of that is a green thing. Blue, white, what do we see in red, and then finally black. Oops. So I think you can see from that the sort of colour you're more likely to see it in. There we go. Oh, Crumble. So now we're moving into the area, well, we've already started to move into it, of the sideboard cards. Yeah, again, just now. Of course, we see artifact destruction still, obviously in Magic. It's just, it's not. This was never reprinted, and I'm not quite sure with this how much we see where it includes life gain for the artifacts controller. You see that in other cards for the other types of permanent. So we've got, in terms of the tags which indicate there are similar, something similar to, we've got appetite for the unnatural, destroy target artifact or enchantment, you gain 2 life, so for 2 and a green. Nature's Claim, destroy target artifact or enchantment, its controller gains 4 life, so single green, but you've got the flexibility of doing enchantments as well. Moulder, where you get to gain X life, and Oxidize, where it's just a single green, destroy a target artifact, it can't be regenerated. So if we look at removal artifact, destroy tags, the tag, bit of a mouthful there. And again, let's maybe look at this from the point of view of a certain type of card. So instant speed destruction. You can see there's a lot of them. Now, interesting, it's not just doing, I see some here where they look like they're, oh, it's blue permanent, so yeah, so technically it could do an artifact. If I do the colour as green, so you can see, excuse me, there's a lot of multiple colours here. But lots of ways that manifests itself. If I just do a CMC of 1, let's just see, like 1 drop destroy artifacts. So if again I go through the colour pie, not sort of thing you'd see in white obviously, but that could be other CMCs. Yeah, so a lot of higher casting cost ones, multimodal stuff. So maybe I'll just do a pass through with any casting cost. So again with blue, slightly more specific, or it's part of a multicoloured card. Black. I would expect to see more generally in red and green if we're talking specifically about low casting cost stuff. So let's do less than 3. And do it by mana value. There we go. Gives us a bit of an idea there. So again, just see if there's anything around there in the different colours. So white, we've got disenchant. So white, it's sort of kicking in at a 2 drop. If we have blue, flash flood. Again, it would have to be like a red artifact. And black really is part of a combination with another colour. And in red, quite a number. And then just cycling back to green. Emerald Charm. Yeah, so this was part of a cycle. These. as you can see, did a number of things. Untapped a target permanent, destroyed a target global enchantment, or made a creature lose flying. But all on one card and for a single green. I do like this cycle of charms. I should see if I have these in paper actually. It'd be good to do them up close. All the same artist. Oh, there you go. Was reprinted in Dominaria Remastered. I wonder what the case is with the other cards. It's turned up as a time shifted card. That one only available in Visions. This one again. Yeah, so. But judging by the price, obviously not highly sought after. But I like them. Mystery Booster Retail Edition foils. Cropped up the following year as well in the World Championship decks. And finally, River Boa. So, yeah, I'm trying to remember when I first saw this, probably in Zendikar. So, you know, Visions, then in the deck that we're sort of talking about. 6th edition, the 99 deck, cropped up in that Battle Royale box set, which I've actually seen that on a shelf of a game store. I was tempted to buy it, but never pulled the trigger. Zendikar, the Jewels of the Planeswalker deck. I don't know if you remember these. So when they released the first Jewels of the Planeswalker game, you could actually get decks that were based on decks in the game. I've got one of these. I don't know if I have this deck, I can't remember. This and the dual deck. Chase versus Raska. Yep. 1 and a green, Island Walk, 2/1, regenerate. Under a tag of evasion. And I think we've looked at this already. Yeah, we did. We looked at some evasion stuff elsewhere. It's pretty popular. I wonder what the lowest... If we get down to CMC of 1... all the tiny little evasive creatures, evasive 1-drops. Because these always used to be fun. I used to, going off at a bit of a tangent, one thing that I always used to find fun was with these evasive creatures, you getting them out and then you suiting them up in some way, like in a Voltron manner. So I'm always interested in 1-drops with evasion, where that's the case. Let's just type that down to creature. Let's go back to white. And again, with some of these, of course, there could be an additional cost. Black, red, and green. Okay, So there we have it. Just a quick look back at the deck. So hopefully you found this video interesting. I actually enjoyed putting it together. You know, at the moment I'm just trying to work a little bit on the consistency. I was jumping around a little bit there, but hopefully you got an overview of the deck, what the artwork's like, and then, you know, cards that do similar things in Magic's history. Also the case, you know, and we saw it a lot here, where these cards have not been reprinted a ton, and with some there are functional reprints, but some things, you know, this type of card with this particular combination of things we've never really seen again. And the other thing that was super interesting is how cards on first examination, you know, obviously have a certain downside, but you can see how within the deck the synergies that are going on. So thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in the next episode.